Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Storied Arcs podcast. I'm your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are tackling Deluxe Volume 4?
Yep.
Of Ex Machina. I'm reading, I keep switching between the omnibus and single issue. This time I read single issues 30 through 40.
Yeah.
And this would be then trades.
Like
7 and 8?
7 and 8, yeah.
8 and 9. No,
7 and 8. 7 and 8, yeah.
7 and 8
7
and no specials. So
no specials this time, yep.
I gotta say right off the bat, when I picked up issue 30, my favorite cover art for the entire series.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the sketch of Kremlin, and Kremlin is doing like the Bob Ross painting of 100. But like, I just, I love the sketch quality on Kremlin there. I don't know. There's just something about that cover that makes me want to buy it. And the fact that he's painting a little gear on his tie. But, the fact that he's painting him when we know what Kremlin's plotline is, which is that he's trying to paint him in a bad light. He's trying to change the image of 100. I thought it was like not at all on the nose like some of the covers have been. Some of the covers are simply like too busy or like honed in too specifically on like one plot line. Like
I will say I agree. In general, I think when you look at maybe a little more the current day books and what the trend is on covers, these are very early aughts, where there's a lot going on, and not just, and oftentimes it's not just like a full scene. So many, almost all of them. I mean, honestly, the issue 30 there with Kremlin is an exception. Almost all of the covers for Ex Machina are some sort of collage style picture,
right.
And
a lot of them are connecting. There's like 6 and 7 were connecting covers. Coming up, 48, 49 are connecting covers.
Yeah, so there's some, they do some interesting things there, but that is a trend that I think we've gone away from in comics. I think in general it seems a little too busy, and I'm not.
You mean the covers?
The covers,
yeah,
the covers,
in particular.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
I think 30 was a refreshing break from the.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the exceptions in the run. I think in general, when you look at covers now, I think not that they're always going for like a minimalist approach, but they're a little more focused, like one character, two character kind of thing. Sometimes they don't even bother with like a background, because we're just looking at a cool image. So it's very of the time though. When if you look at some of the covers for, I think especially kind of, it was very much a Vertigo thing. When you look at the covers that were coming out during that wave of Vertigo, Wildstorm, whatever you want to call it, that imprint, the early aughts, that wave of creator-owned books from DC, they all had a certain aesthetic to them that we moved away from, and these things come and go in waves.
Yeah, they had that aesthetic, but I think they were also still kind of flexing their newfound color palette and capabilities in printing, and
it's going to be they were flexing is the right word. They're saying like, look how cool this art is,
Right. Yeah. It was like, you won't get this many shades of color and fading and transparency and things like that going through your dad's old comics.
Yeah.
Like,
this is
a new prestige art form.
It does have a feel of like, look at this new millennium stuff, look how far we've come. So,
and I do think consistently Tony Harris's art has been very good in this series. I mean,
no, I think it's, his line work, his character work is great. I think he does really interesting thing with faces, close-ups of faces and facial expressions, which I think is kind of a style throughout the book here. But no, I think the book overall in general just looks really, really great.
Well, so let me ask you, I'm wondering if this is color work or pencil work. At the very beginning of this story arc, issue 30, I did chuckle out loud with the whole kid thinks they're seeing Santa because 100 is so terrible at, at being a superhero.
He lights the presents on fire. Fantastic.
Yeah, got the presents on fire. He's like burning through the air. But when you see that texture of the snow falling, at a high speed around him.
Oh, yeah,
that's all coloring after it's kind of a finishing touch, or
I would assume so, because you don't see specifically in that, when you look at that panel, that half page there. um yeah, I don't see a lot of ink lines, you know.
Right.
So
That's what I'm
I
thinking.
I
Yeah, and
want to
I'm like, if I saw this in a book that came out in 2024, I would just think, oh, they did this on a tablet. It's
oh
like,
yeah, of course,
and they
yeah.
can just change the layers after the
Yeah.
fact, or drop things in after it's
And
all finished.
I'm gonna guess like that. Maybe there's simply a note to the colorist of like, just make it look like it's snowing, you know, and then you do whatever it is, and where that I would imagine that's not something that Tony Harris would draw in, because it wouldn't get inked because it's not inked. Those kind of white blotches and specks there and lines um appear to be out there on their own versus like having defined shape. So I think in that case, that looks like it's all on the colorist.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing with a specific note of it's Christmas Eve in New York, make it look snowy.
Yeah. Which it's all to great effect.
Yeah. Oh,
Uh,
definitely.
but
Well, it
yeah,
gives
it was
it
just
gives a
one of those things
blurriness
where I
and
was like,
unclearness. Yeah, it looks like
yeah.
you're looking out into a kind of sleety, snowy, wintry mix
And it's the artist and
landscape.
colors working in tandem really well.
Yeah. Because yeah, even you see the effect going over parts that are obviously drawn, like on the next page when you see kind of the upward shot of Mitchell in the foreground and the water tower in the background. So there's obviously that snow effect is going through. It's in front of both Mitchell and the water tower. So
Right.
it's a case there where again, where I'm assuming that that's all being done by the colorist on top of the um the pencils and inks that were given to him.
Okay, so here's my next question. And like sorry to front load us here on issue 30, but it's like, why not start with the first story arc here?
Sure.
Um it then cuts to Mitchell in his bedroom in 2003.
Hmm.
So now we're in the mayor era, and she, hands him his phone, and he says to the phone, "Thanks, delete all spam and every third message from my mother,"
Yes.
which did make me laugh. And then I was like, wait a second. I thought he talked to like gears and mechanisms, like machines in a medieval sense. That seems like he's talking to an operating system.
Well,
Like
yeah,
that
no.
seems like a command to software.
Well,
I
but
thought he commanded hardware.
well,
It seems like it gets a little sloppy sometimes,
I,
but
well,
they
I mean,
also
well,
have played with the idea of stretching, as long
yeah.
as he can stretch the definition of what constitutes a machine.
But then I guess it comes down to like in the first or second arc when he tells the conference call phone to mute. You know,
Yeah, I figured that was like a
that's a
physical
hardware
mute
function,
button,
but like
right? Um, whereas like, that's literally uh just like the software on the phone
yeah,
that
yeah,
would do that. So anyway, I thought that was interesting, but it's also one of those things where, the crazy guy thought, look, humans are basically machine, or at least part machine.
yeah,
So you must be able to fix me. And we'd never actually found out if Hundred has tried that before or not.
yes,
He made
yeah,
kind of a reference sounding like it, but he was working on something else, and then his plan went through.
yeah.
So he
Well, and
may
you
in
also you
fact
also
be
don't
able to
know if
do
what
something to the
you
human
also don't
body.
know if what he was saying to that person was just to appease him temporarily because
Right.
he had the scissors at the lady's throat there. So it's hard to say. It's hard to trust what he
No, yeah,
what he says
I
in
don't
that
think he
specific
can
moment.
control a human body unless they, have like a replacement hip or something. Maybe he
Maybe,
could do
yeah,
something there.
maybe, yeah, or
But
yeah, that they had some sort of robotic prosthetic or whatever it is. But it also comes down to the idea of what is a machine, because again, we think about um a basic lever is by definition a machine, but
right. So
yet
when I
but yet
first
we
started
know
reading the book, I
but he
thought it had
can't
to be a
control a bow and arrow,
right.
so he probably
I
can't
thought it had
control
to
a
be a
crowbar.
powered thing, and it's like, no, his power has nothing to do with electricity. It's with gears moving. Although when the electricity went out, his powers went out, but those, there's other stuff
Those
going
are
on.
connected, yeah.
So it's still an interesting undefined power set, which is kind of
Well,
interesting
but
this far in.
I think it goes back to either what you said in the zero or the first episode of our discussion, the idea
Doesn't
of
matter.
well,
Yeah.
but the idea of what would this series look like if there was a continuation now in current day, given all the advances we've had specifically in electronics and technology. Here in this moment right here, what does January refer to it as? 14 emails about it on your crackberry thing, because that's what we called the BlackBerry back then,
Right.
because that was that very, very, very first gen of what we would now consider a smartphone, even though we I don't think we consider what the BlackBerry was as a smartphone. That was more just like a PDA that had similar functions that ported into what became smartphones. But here in the early aughts, we're just stepping into that world, the world that Mitchell is in right now. And so seeing how we can interact with the BlackBerry, or seeing how the comic tells us he can interact with the BlackBerry, could give us some insight as to how we would interact with with an
That's true,
Android
but
phone
he would
or an iPhone
probably
or whatever.
just die in the modern world with like I looked at my
Yeah,
like home mesh network. I was like testing the speed over the weekend because I'm a dad. That's what I do
something
for
you
fun
do.
now. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was like 43 devices actively connected. And I was like, holy crap. Mitchell 100 would die in my
Well,
house because I've got smart light bulbs. I've got smart light fixtures. I've got
I was
a
going to
smart
say
washer and dryer and
it's
TV
exact.
and Chromecasts and
Think about
tablets. And,
all the cars now, how much more advanced they are. Every modern car now has a computer on it. So it's not just the machine of the vehicle. He could maybe try to tell and stop. Like, it's all the electronics, individual things, all
right.
that
So
stuff he
my
can control.
question is, could he make a car go without gas?
Oh, like could he turn the engine?
Yeah. Could he turn the wheels or the
Ah,
engine?
interesting.
I think technically you would have to say he could. It might be too much
Well, the way,
strain
yeah,
or
I guess
effort,
the
but
question would be, would he be turning the wheels or would he be firing the engine? You
right.
know? Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Either way, new
yeah, yeah,
sustainable solution for the New York taxi cabs.
yeah. You just have Mitchell 100 run everything there. Yeah, go green by having
Really
literally go green.
terrible. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh yeah, nice. Boy. Yeah, okay. So first of all, I loved this whole Pope assassination story arc. The big comp that kept coming to my mind in a very exciting way, not in like a this is derivative way, was Demon in a Bottle. Um, which I
okay.
don't. Have you ever read Demon in a
Oh
Bottle?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's like it's I think it's Justin Hammer hacks into Tony's suit with like a radio wave at a public appearance, and while he's got his hand around someone for a photo op, it sets off his repulsor and it just shoots someone through the chest, and Iron Man just flies away like sorry about that, don't know what
My bad.
happened. Yeah, and and his identity is secret, so it's like Tony has some insulation, be like, dude, what happened to your bodyguard? But it was a microwave attack, forcing
Mm.
him to do something he didn't want to do to kill someone in public and ruin his reputation. And it was like, oh, that's actually pretty similar here. Obviously the context for what the character's going through is very, very different. But the villain strategy is taken straight out of the Iron Man
Yeah,
Demon
yeah,
in a Bottle
yeah.
playbook.
The idea that if he can talk to machines, then one could posit that machines could talk back to him.
Yeah, and machines can be hacked.
Yes,
Um,
yeah. And yeah, exactly. So if he has that ability, then one would think he'd be able to do that. Now, the one thing I am curious about is I do like the storyline. I like the idea behind it. The nameless and essentially faceless Russian
yeah,
villains.
it's so
Um,
unnecessary.
it reminds me back to, I guess it was like volume 2, when we had
Mhm.
the 3 pages of the
Yep,
people in Baghdad watching reports
like a
of
mayor of
Mitchell.
Baghdad. Yeah.
Yeah, and having gone back to the Iraqis, haven't seen them again, and we get these Russians here, and we get a Putin name drop, which again hits very differently now, even than it did.
I think it actually aged pretty well for me. Just like Putin
Well,
doing
yeah,
nefarious things.
it
Like,
is
oh,
it is yeah. In
some
some ways, it is
things
more
don't
relevant. It
change.
is more
Yeah.
relevant. But yeah, but like these random Russians, is it just to show that Mitchell has all sorts and all levels of potential enemies out there?
Right. Like, there's no particular reason they would have a grudge against him.
As far as we know, yeah, we haven't seen anything where who are these guys? Are they Russian mobsters that he took down in the state? Are they appear to be Russian nationalists? So what do they have? Is it simply because they want to get rid of the Pope and they see an opportunity, and he's just a tool?
Right.
Maybe so,
And
but
it's like
then
make an American hero look bad while taking out the Pope.
Yeah, it's like
was
two
kind
birds,
of
one
basic.
stone.
I was like, these characters are not interesting. Their
Yeah.
plot is interesting. Like
Yes, yeah, yeah,
how will 100
yes,
respond to this?
yes, 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 yes.
What will happen?
Yeah,
But so it's like we're almost admitting that those characters aren't interesting, and yet you have the scene where he's like with a Vatican prostitute
yeah,
recapping the plan that we've
yeah,
already heard. And I'm like, this is
yeah,
like 4 to 6 completely worthless pages.
yeah, yeah,
Like
and
no
and
new
and and,
information was conveyed,
and
and
we,
we
we
got the gist of like, oh, this guy's a bad guy, which we already knew.
well, and we also get the other scene when the two guys are talking together, and they're demonstrating with the rats, and then the guy with the eye patch kills the other guy, and it's like, well, what do we care that these two random Russians are squabbling, and he takes one of them out, you know? It's
Right.
like all the time spent with them after he gets this remote control, like none of it seems to matter because those characters don't matter. But again, I'm totally with you. The overall story in this arc, this idea of what they're trying to do to Mitchell and what they're trying to get Mitchell to do, all that's really, really interesting. And I do love I mean the scene where he's meeting with Pope John Paul II, and he's like Mitchell's like you know tearing at his face, at his circuitry that's there, and he's trying to hold on. And then when Bradbury busts the door, because that's what Bradbury does, even if he's
Happy
in with the
Hogan,
Pope,
yeah.
yeah, he always comes to the door. The fact that Mitchell was able to hang on enough and also identify where the signal was coming from, that he has that much control over his abilities, or whatever his abilities are, that he can basically run his own backtrace onto who hacked him. The idea
Yeah.
that it's a
I was
struggle
also
for him.
wondering if the Vatican is a more analog place in general, and he had a little more clairvoyance because of that.
It could be. It could
I
be.
mean, especially compared to New York City. I would think it
Yeah, yeah,
certainly
yeah.
does not have the constant hum of New York City.
Well, I mean, well, maybe back then. That's because again, now I think you assume everywhere has an overloaded electronics because everyone's got a supercomputer in their pocket.
Right.
But yeah, maybe back in the early aughts it wasn't so. I do think it's interesting that I don't know, was the idea of tackling religion, and the potential religious implications of someone like Mitchell 100, was that on your bingo card for like potential storylines or potential hot button things that you thought that BKV and Tony Harris might cover or might try to tackle?
No, and in fact, it's something that I like. I don't recall BKV talking about religion really
Yeah.
any other books.
And so the reason I bring this up is because I went back and had to double check. So by the time this is out, I mean, these issues are coming out in like 2007 or whatnot. It's set in '03 and all that. But like at this point, like we're in a post Angels and Demons and Da Vinci Code world where those books have come out.
right.
And so, I wondered about that as well as like, why was once you bring up the idea of like, oh, what is a potential religious implication? And obviously he's had his quote unquote confessionals with Father Z,
Which,
like
by the way, I love. And it's very
yeah,
strong Matt Murdock vibes.
absolutely. Where that the one guy can fight his
yeah.
Yeah. So we've had that, but like the specific, like you might be the Antichrist kind of stinger at the end there, but that whole idea of involving the Vatican and going to that level, I wonder if there was an influence of like, hey, it's hot right now, like diving into the Catholic Church,
Well, I
and
think especially like the line about like how Mary Magdalene wasn't a prostitute. It's like,
yes,
that was where I did think of Dan Brown.
Exactly. What I'm wondering if that was kind of a little bit of a counter prod, like, hey, we can kind of jump on this or put our spin on this and delve deeper into another potential, issue surrounding Mitchell, and not just specifically about the Antichrist thing, but the idea of faith, I guess. The idea of faith and belief and things like that. Because obviously we get the the astronomer there, the Nigerian priest who
yeah, Father
who
Chetwas.
yeah, who is both a scientist and a priest. That's very much taken from Angels and Demons, which was the if you read the books
Yeah.
that book came before uh Da Vinci Code, even though the movie was set after. But it was that idea of how do we mix these two things. So yeah, I wonder if it was it makes sense to me, I guess, once you say it, when you think about a character, like if our world had a Mitchell 100 who could do these things, it seems a thing that would eventually come up. But yeah, I don't think I would have clocked that early on. If you would ask me like, oh, what kind of hot button issues do you think a book set in the early aughts, a political book would be about? I don't know if religion. I mean, the obvious ones would have been, yeah, terrorism, race
Well, I mean,
relations,
in
war
America,
on
I think
terror, things
religion's
like that.
always kind of and when
Yeah.
it's like, what was the first episode of The West Wing? The big controversy was Josh pissed off a religious right group on a talk
Yeah,
show.
the far right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just in the air politically. It certainly still is. So I liked uh, the astronomer character.
Mhm.
I thought very well written. I think there are a lot of like the progressive side of the Catholic Church, very into science, very into owning and apologizing for, egregious things in
All this
history. Yeah, all that over there.
for
Um,
history.
which and it seems like, yeah, he seems like a wise guy.
Yeah.
And then for him to pivot to accusing him of being, I think he uses the definite article, yes, the Antichrist,
Yeah. Well,
as
yeah, I fear you. Yeah. The Antichrist. Yeah.
which is a symptom of someone who has only heard like American evangelical talk, because there is no mention of like the Antichrist as a singular entity in the Bible anywhere.
Yeah.
There's like, I would almost call it like a throwaway line with like a plural, like lowercase a, like people who do X, Y, and Z are antichrists.
Right.
And somehow that got conflated into some end of the world figure in the
Where it's
minds
one
of
being,
like,
right?
right. It's
Yeah.
one supreme evil being that everyone's looking out for. And like charismatic and evangelical Christians wrote like really bad fiction and made movies, and that's what Kirk Cameron's been doing for the last 20-30 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So I was like, big swing there, but you are now saying like this guy's really educated in science and theology, but his knowledge of theology is no deeper than someone who would like get it off of watching the news in America.
I was going to say it isn't just like the Left Behinds of the world, but it's also like also other popular fiction, like it's The Stand, it's The Omen, it's
Sure.
all the
sure.
it's all of these. It's in popular culture. It has moved out of the specific religious text to the idea of yeah, that there will be this idea that there is the one evil one, the one
100%.
reborn.
Yeah, I mean, any form of dualism has one ultimate evil, one ultimate good, and dueling. So it was like a slight misread, but also like I just immediately went with it. Like I didn't bump on it. I just like clocked it and kept going, because I was like, the plot's too good. I don't care. I'm not going to get hung up on it. Which I think is where you were with the Twin Tower thing in issue 11, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and especially here specifically because it's that last page of the issue, and it's again you end with the full page splash on just some it's not specifically a cliffhanger, but it's just it's one scene, one phrase, something someone says that just like gets you, and the issue's over. And like seriously,
and
there's not a whole lot.
Doesn't always deliver on that.
It has the final page stinger there, but in terms of how impactful they are, it does vary there. But they do like to end their issues that way, and it's really hard to top a priest looking at Mitchell being like, you might be the Antichrist, boom, cut to black, see you next month. So, I mean, from a dramatic storytelling perspective, it works perfectly. Yeah. From a theological perspective, got some holes in it, but we're not worried about that. We got stories to tell. So, but yeah, I'm with you. I don't bump on that because you're assuming that the reader is fluent in the same sort of pop culture ideas as the creators are. You know what he's trying to say there. What the intent of the creators is to say, is that we're having this guy believe in the idea of the one true Antichrist, the one true, you know, destroyer of worlds or whatever.
Right. And I
Yeah.
think, yeah, like you could even retcon it in your head to like make it fit. But as you keep going through this, it's like, it's a really good 4-issue arc that I think probably could have been a 2-parter or 3-parter. It's like cut back on some of the villain stuff. I'm like looking at the beginning of issue 32 where he's like beating the old man with the stick
Yeah, yeah.
and then has a surrounded by people with swords. And it's like, that doesn't come up again in any way. It's not related to anything.
So
Am I
let's see.
missing something?
I was think I the only thing I could think of is the idea that not showing that he's intolerant of someone else's beliefs, but he's like, I got something to do here. This guy is, what is it, jump bail or whatever it is. Yeah, this pedophile Skip Bail. Okay, so he's like, this guy is claiming to be here under whatever religious sanctuary, and Mitchell's just like, no, this is stupid. Like,
Right.
this guy needs to go to jail. I don't care what your religion is. I don't care what you're saying your beliefs are.
I see. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
But again, I don't think it's necessary, and nor do I think it's, or they could have done, because again, they're
It
kind of
ties
locked
in, but
in.
it doesn't add anything.
Yeah, they're locked into the issue structure, right? Where there's going to be some sort of flashback to a time before our current timeline. Then we're going to jump back, and so I think that's what they're trying to show here. But again, I'm with you. The idea of like, I don't know what this adds. It doesn't add anything to me,
And
to the
that's what,
story.
like, unlike the show Arrow, that really started to run me raw by like middle of season 2, where I was like,
We
there's
keep
only
going back
so
to the
many
island.
stories on the island.
Yeah, gotta
Like,
keep going. Yeah,
you know,
and it's
I
amazing
understand
how
gotta
every
pad
story on the
runtime.
island somehow relates to the thing he's going to right now.
I know,
Back in
in chronological order.
it's
Yeah.
amazing. It's amazing. Yeah,
Just
yeah.
living a time loop.
Yeah. But yeah, I agree that there is some fat in this storytelling that I don't think detracts from the story, though. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
this is my favorite like single trade
Yeah.
thus far, or story arc. I guess the trades are probably all messy because those one shots are probably split across these 2 trades.
Probably. So I could look up exactly when. Yeah.
I know we're
Yeah.
gonna get into it, but I was not big on the one shots for the most part. Um, but yeah, and I think, like, you know, I'm not Catholic. I've never been Catholic. But I think their portrayal of John Paul, you know, they didn't draw him directly,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
which I think is always kind of a smart move.
Yeah.
But
No, of course, at this
I
point,
don't think you could be offended by it. I think, in fact, I think it makes him seem like a pretty decent guy, right?
I think so. Well, and I think I had to look it up as well. So, double a second. He passed away in April 2005. So, in the timeline of the story,
There was
he's
a
a couple.
closed canon on his life when
Yeah.
it was published. Yeah.
Yeah. He's a couple in the real timeline. Real timeline of the story, he's a couple years away from dying, but in the timeline of the publication of the story, you know, this is again being written in probably '06, published in '07. I think at this point we are. So yeah, so John Paul Jones is out of it. In terms of yeah, you're not depicting someone who is still living, you know, versus I guess it would be different. To
Like,
jump
say,
ahead,
depicting Brian K. Vaughan.
well, no, what I was going to say, no, actually, they can do themselves. What I was going to say was, jumping ahead for the moment, when we jump to the next story arc, we talk about everything that goes on around the 2004 Republican National Convention in New York, which is where it was held in 2004. We don't get depictions. We don't see President Bush. We don't see Rudy Giuliani.
Right.
We don't
We
see
get
those
quotes from
characters.
Bush, Cheney, and Giuliani, but we never
But
see them.
we don't see any of those people. So it seems to be kind of maybe what their approach is for dealing with the real world people in their quasi real world timeline.
I think it's a very smart way to do it. And I think, you know, not to jump too far ahead to 40 there, but, you know, he even depicts himself. He has Tony Harris draw him
Yeah.
and then has the letterer write how great Tony Harris is.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
like, this is just like the Mutual Appreciation Club.
Yeah.
It was like they corked a bottle
What?
of champagne at issue 40 and they were like, let's
While
celebrate
they also
ourselves.
pretty much crap on, like, he craps on himself in terms of maybe how overly verbose he is and how annoying he can be and things like that.
And how people mistake him for Brian Bendis.
That's very, we'll get to that. That's very
Yeah.
funny. That's of all the meta jokes in issue 40, that may be my favorite one, but yeah, we'll get to that. But again, so going back to see, but I agree.
What I was going to say about that though, is that I think he's comfortable putting himself in there because he's already established, no, this is like a what if version of our world.
Yes.
Like there's one tower left. Yes. This is very close to, but not our world. So the Brian K. Vaughan in here is not the Brian K. Vaughan you purchased this book from. Yeah, it's close,
but they're close.
Just like the Giuliani in here is close.
Yeah.
And the Bush in here is close, but it's not. So I think that's his cover when he gets that close to the real world. But he still is smart enough to like give it.
We're not going to draw them
berth.
in. Yeah. We're not going to make them.
I think it's a very fine line. And I think he found the right space.
Oh no. They definitely, I think they towed that line correctly. But I want to go back to what you said about. I agree. I think the depiction of, in this case, the two main priests we see, and maybe as representative of the Catholic Church in general, I don't think there would be a huge complaint, unless you're like a super hard line,
Right. If you're gonna wordsmith everything and you just don't understand the story. I think it's a pretty flattering portrait of him.
It's definitely not inflammatory. It doesn't paint them in a bad light. Yeah, your mileage may vary on how positive it is, but it's definitely not a negative light. Like, he doesn't go there and Mitchell doesn't go there and just get
it's not Sinead
get flamed. Yeah. He doesn't get flamed by the church there. I think with you, especially that last interaction, when Mitchell goes to the post bedroom, he's given the Bible there, and they do things like, I just turned to the page there when Mitchell's first talking to him, and all you see is the hand laying on his chest because the pillar of the bedpost is covering up his face as he's laying there. It's just like, if you weren't aware what we're trying to do. Yeah, exactly. I guess we do see his face a little, but then at that point it's just like, here's an old white guy.
Right.
So, but I think that conversation there and that back and forth, I think if anything is a positive, I think that one is right there. The idea of, again, we're not talking about religion and science or that. It's just kind of like what you believe in, what kind of a higher power thing and all that. And it does end with,
and the book's getting weirdly higher powery with like,
it is. Yeah.
Whether it's like, I am still taking like the purely naturalist interpretation of the book, where it's like he might be having, hallucinations or visions or something like that. But I'm like feeling like little callbacks to Kill or Be Killed, where I was like resisting the writing on the wall in favor of like the naturalist interpretation that I missed. I was kind of blindsided by the ending there, so I was like, I'm trying to keep an open mind about this. I'm just thinking of like Brian K. Vaughan. Like, I have a like headcanon of how Brian K. Vaughan thinks and writes and what's acceptable to him.
A lot of the stuff has a bit of a supernatural bent to it. There's always an otherworldly
sure. There's always ghosts in Saga and things like that. But
but I mean
usually not like cut and dry.
No. But I mean, Saga obviously is a fantasy sci-fi epic there, but I'm thinking like Paper Girls is a grounded story in our real world that's got a bunch of weird shenanigans going on there. Why the Last Man is in our world. Again, it's a grounded story that has this element of like, well, what happened to the world here? There's always this extraordinary thing that infuses. And so, but I think you're right to be, I don't know about skeptical, but at least on notice.
Cautious,
of like, cautious. Yeah. Of what we see there. And of course it ends, that issue and that arc ends with Mitchell kind of looking off and confessing to Pope John Paul there that, the vision he had, seeing whatever being that was that he's going to be president of the United States one day, which is, again, tying back into kind of the larger political aspect of what's going on here. This, you know, could a guy like this, could a guy like this be president? And I think what I really liked is, I said we got the next couple issues that are standalone, but when we get back into the story specifically about centered around that 2004 Republican National Convention, the people around Mitchell, you know, Wiley, Candy, his chief of staff, his deputy, all this stuff, they all sense a change in him, you know,
Right.
they all sense this change of like something happened over there because you're thinking about this differently now. So I like how that carried through, how it's like once you say it out loud, something as big as like I'm gonna be president one day, that can't help but change you on a fundamental level. You know, how you
Right.
carry how you carry yourself, how you speak, it changes everything. Once that idea gets in your head, it's like you've been incepted, right? Once that idea is there, you can't get out of it, and it's visible to everyone who's around you every day. You know, the people you work with, they can all see like why they clocks it immediately. Like there's something else going on here. Like what are you saying? You know, you're taking a different approach here. So I like how that carried through. I like how that was depicted. I like that we got to see that there's you know, that Mitchell sees a potential here for furthering his political career, which again, the tension there is we know what Kremlin is doing with the help of January, that they're trying to undermine his political career because they want to get him back being the great machine again.
Yeah. Yeah. So all that to say, how would you rate this like whole Vatican plot line in terms of what we've covered so far?
I think the overall story, I think it's maybe my favorite up there with the jury duty one. And,
Okay.
and not because they're perfect, because again, I think there's specifically this Vatican storyline, it has a lot of fat that you can cut. But I liked the idea of it. I liked like I think what you talked about, the idea that he could be hacked, that he himself is a machine now more than a regular person. You know, whether or not he can control another person is, I think we assume can't be done, but we now know that someone can't control him, that he has enough we'll just call it electronics, you know, that he can now be I like that idea. And I like the way that it was presented through specifically the story of dealing with science and faith and religion and things of that nature. I thought that was really engaging, even if some of the specifics, sorry, if even though all the specifics around the Russians, I think were worthless. You didn't need any of that.
Yeah.
The overall structure of that story was presented, I really, really enjoyed. What about you?
Yeah, it's my favorite so
Yeah.
far. I thought I knew where the thing was going from the beginning. You know, the other comp for me with that was Anthony Horowitz is a modern fiction writer who writes for the Ian Fleming estate for new 007 novels. And his most recent 007 novel was called With a Mind to Kill. And it was Bond had been kidnapped and tortured by the Russians, and they had put some brain controlling mechanism in place for him and let him escape or think that he escaped. And MI6 discovered this, tried to reverse it, and then sent him on a mission. And it was like right at the climax of the mission was the time to figure out whether MI6 successfully reversed the thing or not.
Yeah.
It's like, we're going to send him on the mission. We've never encountered this before, let alone cured it. There's no way for us to demonstrate it. So we just have to put him back out in the field to see what happens.
Just
And I was like, yeah, it's, I don't know. It's like kind of an underdone trope. It's like, it's out there enough, with demon in a bottle and little, mind control and resisting things.
yeah.
But this one telegraphed from the end of the first issue. And then you almost get distracted with it when you find out like everyone has ulterior motives. Like the
Yeah.
Russians wanted him there to work on the Pope. The head astronomer at the Vatican wanted him there for spiritual intervention.
Yeah.
Hunter wouldn't go
Yeah.
unless Candy talked him into it with his own set of agenda. So
Yeah.
it's like
Well,
everyone,
her agenda, yeah, of like,
right.
hey,
It's just
rinse
like
some extra votes. Yeah.
everything kind of, you know, pouring into the same, like rowing in the same direction,
Mhm.
just gave a really strong current. So like when I read that first issue, I was like, "Yeah, I'll read an issue tonight." I read that first issue and I was like, "Nope, I'm reading the end of this story arc."
Got to get to the end of this one. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And I haven't had that, I've generally been reading this at least one traded per sitting. Um, but I've never felt compelled like I have to see the next issue right now. And this was the first time I had that with this book. I don't think it's really that kind of book in general. Like I don't think it's trying to do that.
No, no, and I think that goes
Um,
back to things we've talked about in almost every episode so far. Is that these story arcs are they're very short, 3 or 4 issues, and it's almost like it feels like an anthology, even though obviously it's generally chronological through it. It's meant to be chronological through his term as mayor, right? So we're going from '02 to '05. So we're following him through these various moments here, but at times they can feel like vignettes, right? Because it's like, okay, well, what's the next political crisis he's got to deal with, you know? And so he deals with that, and you move on to the next one. So everything feels really contained, even though there are obviously through lines and connections through them all. But yeah, I don't think it's meant to be this idea of like every issue leads in the next one back to back to back to back to back to back like that. You know, it is in these short bursts, and so I think when you get a story like this Vatican plot line, where you feel compelled to keep going like that, I think that's the exception for this book, and that's not a criticism of it, because I don't think that's the way that it's meant to be constructed. I think they want you to keep reading because you want to stay in the world with the characters, and you find that interesting. You find the discourse interesting, maybe less so because you find the specific plot lines interesting. Does that make sense?
yeah, no, that's
Yeah,
exactly
yeah,
it.
yeah,
And I'm very much in it for like the episode of the week
yeah,
vibe.
yeah, yeah.
I respect that, especially in in an indie comic where I feel like most of them know they're not going to do 1,000 issues or 150 or 200 issues.
Yeah, yeah.
So a lot of them feel the pressure to like really heavily serialize it.
And I think we can even go back to, again, the first book we talked about, another BKB book, Paper Girls. You know,
Yeah.
that book is 30 issues, but that's all one story. You got to read that front to back. You know, there's
Right.
no, even the isolated, when they jump to different timelines and the stories may be isolated because the girls are in different places, different times, doesn't matter. Everything flows 1 through 30. You
Right. And
know,
in that book, if you're like, oh, pretty pink cover, I'm going to pick up issue number 3,
yeah,
you would just be like, what the hell am I reading?
yeah, yeah. You
And,
have to go back to number one. Yeah,
and at the same time on the shelf, there would have been probably like, I don't know, Batman Rebirth number 3 by Tom King. And there would be like a little explanation of like, here's what's happened so far in the I Am Gotham
yeah,
plot.
yeah,
The single issue would technically stand alone as like its own story, even though
yeah.
it's also part of a
Yeah,
serialized
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
But like Paper
you,
Girls would make no sense at all
yeah,
because people pick up Batman, they already know who Batman is.
exactly. You can pick up any issue of Spider-Man in the middle of a storyline, um, with general knowledge and context clues. You can figure out what's going on.
Right.
You know,
You
the story.
can,
Yeah,
in fact,
and
it's kind of a fun sport.
yeah, yeah, and the idea that every comic can be someone's first comic doesn't always work with independent creator owned stuff, because it's meant to be more finite. So in that way, I think a book like Ex Machina is a little different, because yeah, if you started with, let's say, somewhere in Deluxe Volume 2, right? So you started somewhere in the teens, you could figure out kind of what the book's about. Okay, this guy talks to machines and we're getting these flashbacks. You pay attention to the dates. Okay, he's the mayor. You could piece together and not be lost, and you would be okay. I think understanding what's happening, you wouldn't get the full context of like the specific origin of him going out to the Brooklyn Bridge and find this artifact and all that stuff there. That stuff's less important right now, because again, it's a mostly political book. So you're simply watching a former superhero vigilante who has the ability to talk to machines try to navigate being mayor of New York City. And you can kind of jump in anywhere on that and figure out what's going on, or at least not be lost, on the same level as you would be if you picked up, yeah, like you said, like issue 4 or 5 of Paper Girls. Let's try to start with that.
Yeah.
There's a smoother on ramp for a book like this, because I think of how they set it up, because of the story they're trying to tell. obviously I'm a proponent, and maybe you are too. Obviously, just always start at the beginning, and go from there, read it all. Especially with books like this, with Batman, Spider-Man, Superman, stuff like that. You can't really do that. But people ask all the time, like, how do you start one of those stories? The answer is to start with one. I don't care if there's 17 number ones. Just pick a number one and start with that, because
Right.
that'll tell you what you need to know. That's the place you got to start.
A good number one will, not the.
Well, yeah,
There are occasionally number ones where like I've tried to pick them up and it's just like a money grab limited series thing and whatever. But yeah, in broad strokes, yes,
Yeah.
like just start somewhere. But and I think Ex Machina kind of left itself open to someone could have walked in, picked up
Yeah,
issue 30, said that's a
yeah,
cool cover,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
followed this plot line
Mhm.
without knowing everything.
No,
Uh,
I think the book would tell you um what you need to know about Mitchell, and that he has this thing where he can talk to machines. You see him do it. The Russians obviously recap what he's doing there. So yeah, you could understand what's happening without having the specific details of the story that we got in the first two or three volumes. So yeah, you said you wouldn't be as lost. You wouldn't have as full of a picture, but you'd be able to get what's going on. You could read that and conceivably, like, I'm gonna keep reading, or I've read that, so now I'm gonna go back and fill in from the beginning. I think there's enough there to hold your interest to go back and see what this is all about. And that isn't always the case with independent comic creator owned books. They usually don't have that kind of onboarding spot.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about the one shots next, or do you want to talk about the self-proclaimed Catwoman Elektra bit of it, which I just love the self-awareness and like just owning
Well,
the
yeah,
love
yeah,
of comics,
yeah. Well,
which it's
that's a
like
theme. It's a theme
who is
throughout.
Vertigo books for, if not
Yeah.
like the deep
So
comic lovers?
let's talk about these next two issues here. Last week I talked about last week we got the Bradbury backstory, right? And I said how it felt out of place for me because we hadn't spent enough time with Bradbury to see him as anything other than the guy who comes in and kicks the door down. Which again, he does that again. Like that's all he's there for. He's the guy who's supposed to be protecting Mitchell. And we see him. He's the guy who's quick to draw his gun, kick the door down, and rush in. And so to get his full backstory, while interesting, it seemed out of place. And I think I said last week that it would have made more sense to me if you had paused the story and just given us like 4 or 5 issues combined, in a row of backstories for all of his characters, all the other side characters in his life, and just said, we're pausing the story and we're going to give you these backstories. So now you care about these characters. So when we continue the story afterwards, have a better and deeper appreciation for who they are. Instead, what we got last time, what was the one shot on Bradbury, we move on. Now in this volume, in this edition, we get basically the exact same kind of setup, but this time it's for Commissioner Angadi. We get her backstory, which again, I think they've only maybe once early on alluded to the fact that her husband was in the South Tower. Because
Yeah.
it was the only reason. It was the only reason why, like, she didn't shoot Mitchell on the spot, because obviously we know that she basically hated him as a vigilante. But the only reason that in the beginning she even tolerated him was because of what he did on September 11th, and specifically because her husband was in the South Tower. So that was like the only thing we knew about her, other than the fact that we know that she served under Giuliani, under the previous Republican regime. So now again we get this full backstory under the guise of her telling Mitchell that, like, she's getting a divorce, to a character that we haven't seen or know nothing about, to this husband character that until these pages didn't exist. We didn't know him. We didn't see him. We didn't get anything about him.
Well,
so
and
now
more
we're
importantly,
supposed to be invested into it.
didn't matter and still doesn't matter by the time you're done with it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then it's just like, what was all this about?
Well, and honestly, this entire issue, I think, is meant to lead up to the bat signal at the end. Like, that's it.
Which was kind of ham-handed.
Yes, it's kind of cheap. It's very cheesy. But like, that's the whole setup. The whole setup is to for her getting to a point where there is the gear symbol, which is great though. The idea that it's the gear, but
Yes.
the idea
No,
that
I get it.
yeah,
And like the comic person in me did be like, yeah, I don't know if I would have been able to resist it either. But
yeah, but
um,
that you say what it's for, and I think it's just for that, and it's just to do that, and not, but it's not to make the signal part of the story. It's just to do that reveal. It's just to have that moment. It isn't that isn't about, oh, now we're gonna have the Batman Commissioner Gordon relationship now. We're not gonna have that moving forward like in Batman. It's just to do that reveal. It's just it's again, you have that page turn and like, oh, it's the bat signal, and that issue's over. So like in the larger scheme of the story, like we're not getting anything out of that. Which I think puts that in a different category than the issue that comes next, which is called The Race, which again, I don't think adds anything to the story, but there's a larger thing that it's dealing with, a larger idea that it's dealing with. Which I think is the again, we're touching on another kind of third rail topic here, right? The idea of race and slavery and the original sin of America. But I think in this case, what they're trying to say is, and I guess it was probably less known at the time that this book came out, was that there were slave markets in New York City. As much as it was the North and all of that, the idea that slavery existed in the North, and it existed specifically in New York City, and that was a history that hadn't been talked about, that hadn't been widely known. Now I believe there are historical markers in terms of which buildings, like down on Wall Street or whatnot, including I think City Hall, were built by slaves. Those things have been recognized now, but like that's only happened in the last like 10, 12 years, whatever it is. So even after this book came out. So I feel like this is them, I think, getting on a soapbox a little bit and attempting to shine light on this issue. But again, we run into the idea of this is two white guys talking about the racial dynamics and the history of New York City. So it's like,
but it's a white guy learning it in the story. It's not a white guy teaching it.
Well, it's the white guy learning
important.
it. Yes, but it's still the two white guy creators are teaching the story to the reader.
Right.
Again,
no, but I think it's more analogous because, if they were, I think this is Brian K. Vaughan's way of saying, hey, I went to a museum possibly curated by Howard University, and I learned from these people about this.
Yeah.
And so will my white character. Yes. I think
okay.
Actually, again, it's not my place to say, but I actually think that is a much better way to do it than, using inflammatory language, racially charged language over artwork, so that you can like criticize the artist in, the first story arc of the series.
Sure. Okay.
That one was like, I have a pass to do this because I'm writing against it. Whereas I think this is saying I'm depicting a white person's discovery of, of racial history that in general, white people don't know.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I was much more willing to give that a pass, but it also felt like, but just why? Like, why did it need to go there? And I think it's a very tough ask for the artist to depict a slave.
Yeah.
It's
that's a fair question. And again, I think this is another situation where I can recognize the attempt of what they're trying to do. Like there's the idea of like, we're going to try and educate people about this thing that we know isn't well known, and especially then at the time wasn't well known, and this day maybe still not as well known. I don't know, but this idea of like we have a platform with a comic book, and we have a character that seems well suited to have this lesson be imparted to them. And I think and I do think there's some good dialogue here. I think Wiley has some good dialogue to him about what he was trying to do as the Great Machine and how he saw him and the things that Mitchell would have been blind to because of his white privilege. in terms of thinking he could be some sort of savior. I think there's some good lines there, some good critiques that are true. Um, and that would be true for someone like Mitchell in that situation. I agree with you though. The idea of like why, again, I think it's them trying to make a. I'm choosing to believe that it's a good faith attempt. It's a good faith effort to to spotlight a piece of history, specific New York history that at the time I don't think a lot of people knew about because it wasn't discussed. Because people just simply assumed that slavery was a Southern thing, and it's kind of like it is kind of like freshman takes one African American studies history class freshman year of college and is like you're not going to believe what they don't tell you in school, and it's kind of like actually some people actually do know this stuff, but it's him, but it's him thinking you can
Right.
you
There's
can
two ways to
understand.
respond to that. The one is to be gatekeepy and say, oh, I can't believe you didn't know that. Like, how dare you? When the other one is to like be curious and say, like, that's great
Yes.
that you learned that.
Yes,
I
yes,
wonder
yeah,
what else you don't know.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
I
yes,
think
yes,
there's, um, you know, and I try to be as open handed with that stuff as I can be and say, uh, you know, that's great. I already see other blind spots you have,
yeah,
but I also don't want to squash your enthusiasm and make you go back to knowing nothing.
yes. You should celebrate what you've learned now. Don't make you feel bad for not having known it before. That
Right.
kind of thing. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I mean, as much as possible. And like,
yeah.
there are varying degrees. It's like if you're like a Holocaust denier or something like that, it's like,
Yeah.
nah, you had to go out of your way to learn something like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like,
You had to make an effort. Yeah, that is true. That is true. But I think, but
but if
I
it's like
think,
something that you just like, I remember one of the most laudable things in the last few years when Tom Hanks was in an interview and he said that he saw a newspaper headline that said like it was the something at probably 80th or 70th anniversary of Black Wall Street burning
oh
down.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And Tom Hanks was talking to the interviewer and he was like, when I read that in the paper, my first thought was, what is that? I've never heard of that before. And like I went through public education and college and I read the newspaper every day. And he lives in a white world and he's like, I didn't know anything about it. So then he went and sought out books and read up on it and learned about it. But it just showed, and that to me was one of those things where it's like, I mean, you can't know what you don't know and what you're not exposed to.
yeah. And
And then
that's
the
the difference
question
though
is, what do
between
you do when you have a little bit of exposure
yes,
to it?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think that's the difference between someone like that. You said like a Holocaust denier. It's different if someone being like, Black Wall Street, that never happened. You
Right.
know, that's like I know about it and it's wrong. That's it versus
Right.
and I
That's
think
just willful
yeah,
stupidity.
ignorance, yeah, stupidity, yeah. And I think that I mean that's a great example because that was a conversation around the HBO Watchmen series that David Lindelof show ran. They depicted Black Wall Street there. They depicted that, and that actually I think that episode was written by Core Jefferson, who just did American Fiction.
Okay.
I think because he was in that writer's room. I think he specifically wrote that episode. But that episode came out, and like you could search online, people be like, "What is Black Wall Street?" And the number of people who had the same reaction that Tom Hanks had, been like, and people who be like, "I grew up in Tulsa, and like I never heard anything about this. Like this wasn't taught at all." So people were saying, that I think that's a great example of just like, the you're right. You don't know what you don't know. So can you be blamed for not knowing about Black Wall Street if you have no concept of it even existing? Like, how would you know to look for that? And of course that's the root of the problem, of course. But it
Well,
comes
and
down
that's the
to
problem of segregation, right? It's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly, yeah.
my
But
black friends
how
know
could
about it.
yes, yes, indeed. So, but if you aren't aware something even exists, like how are you supposed to be? How are you supposed to be knowledgeable about that? So yeah, it is.
So
Again,
to me, this issue would be like if Tom Hanks now set out to produce a movie about like a white guy who learned about Black Wall Street and decided he wanted to do something about it.
yeah,
And it's like he's not trying to educate people who already know about this.
Yeah.
He's trying to create an entryway for people like him
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
discovering this.
Yeah.
And I do think that's genuinely Tom Hanks's kind of thing. Like he
Yeah.
got really into the Apollo missions and then Apollo 13. And then he got really into World War II and he Saving Private Ryan. And then like, and for each of those, he then produced documentary series about the thing. It was from the Earth to the Moon.
From the Earth to the Moon. Yeah.
And then,
Which actually, yeah. And then, I mean,
Band of Brothers.
Band of Brothers is not documentary, but yeah, it's based on the Ambrose book. So, no, yeah, I think, yeah, that they're, but, and that's a laudable, if that would have happened, that's a laudable attempt. I think, and you can recognize the effort there, but you can also,
so I think that's what BKB is doing here.
But you could also be like, that's great, Tom Hanks, but like, should you be doing that? You know?
And I think, yeah,
you can ask the same kind of question.
Yeah. And I think he even has said recently, like, no, he wouldn't do that. And no, he wouldn't have played that role in Philadelphia. And some other things. So it's like, no, he wouldn't have. But 20 years ago, I don't think people asked those questions that way.
Yeah.
For better or worse, it was just it's just not on people's radar.
It actually ties into the idea of something that that Wiley kind of says to Mitchell there. This idea of being driven by kind of this level of white guilt. You know, and so it's almost like this issue is a response to that as well. Of like, we learned this about our city, and now we feel responsible to tell other people about it. It now becomes our responsibility to educate more people. And it's like, well, yes, it's good to let more people in on this, but like, are you sure you're the ones who should be doing it just because you just learned about it? You know, just because you had your eyes open on it doesn't mean that you should be the one necessarily to be the delivery mechanism, regardless of what that mechanism is. Should you be the guys telling that story? And I agree. 20 years ago, no one thought twice about that. The answer was, of course, because we're the people telling the story. Who else? The answer would have been, who else could tell the story? You know,
right.
And 20 years ago, we'd be like, well, yeah, who else would be? And now we're like, well, I don't know, maybe give the black writer and the black artist a job, you know, that sort of thing. You know, maybe just, hire more people who don't look like you. That's
at least create a writing team for the issue.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which is something that, again, going back to that Watchmen series, something that Damon Lindelof talked about is like, I know I'm not the person to tell this story. This is the show I'm telling, but to tell this story, like, this wasn't me in the room here. You know, this is part of our show, but we brought people in who knew about this. They're the ones who are telling this story through that lens. So having that level of awareness versus if they had tried to do something like that, 20 years ago, they wouldn't have thought twice about, hey, maybe we should have a black writer in here. You know, maybe we should have some representation for the people whose story we're trying to tell. That's not a thought that would have crossed anybody's mind, for better or worse, mostly for worse. So again, you can recognize the effort and see what they're trying to do here. So for this issue, I can appreciate the effort, even though it still feels a little ham-handed to me, feels a little clunky. And I think that just comes with the distance from when it was written.
I think the trick is, like, if I were Brian K. Vaughan and and if I felt the way that we're feeling about this issue, when we go to publish the 2024 Black Label edition, I might be like, it doesn't really impact the story. Just drop that one. Just cut it out. Cut out this one. Cut out.
You could.
Then there would be outrage from people being like, "Why is he canceling his own stuff?" It's like, no, he just thought better of it, which is literally like what the Dr. Seuss family. Was it Dr. Seuss or Shel Silverstein or someone? It was like, if someone's estate was like, it's not really selling anyway. We're kind of embarrassed about it.
Yeah.
Let's just drop it. And it was like, they're canceling Dr. Seuss. And it's like, oh my gosh.
So it's like, no, we're not saying it doesn't exist. It obviously still exists. Just like, we don't need to shine a light on it, And
it's literally capitalism. It's like, it wasn't selling well.
There's
no market for it. So we're dropping it.
So,
but anyway.
So I think it was a little strange, though. I think from going back from a macro sense of the comic, to have these back-to-back one-shots and have them not be like specials. Now the previous issue, the Angotti issue, obviously that follows the pattern we just saw last edition, right, with the Bradbury story. So you can almost see how they're kind of mirroring that here. Um, this issue, honestly, it felt like it could have been a special issue, but then you run into the problem of like a very special issue of Ex Machina, you know? So maybe that's bad optics if they were like, oh, we're doing the one on race and that's a special issue. It's not part of the, but it seems strange in terms of going back to back one shot stories. And then now we're picking back up with, with our main storyline after that. It seemed like a strange time for that. An issue like that almost feels like it belongs story wise where issue 40 is, right? At the, tell an arc, here's a one shot story. Tell an arc, here's a one shot story. That's kind of the pattern they had fallen into. So it did feel a little weird, and maybe that contributed to some of my feelings towards that second one shot is because it came back to back.
The second one shot, the art felt different, but it might not have been. But I thought maybe they'd
it's still Tony Harris regular issue. So
there's it's a different one that I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I mean, like the specials are different.
Right, the specials
artists
are different.
Yeah.
I was thinking there was one stint in here. Well, there's the big joke at the end of 40.
Yeah, issue 40 is the other one. Yeah. So before then, I guess we should move on to the
Trouble.
Yeah, the next one. I guess it's called it's called Dirty Tricks is what it's called in the
yeah. I was thinking it was called Trouble, but maybe that's the character's self-assigned name.
Maybe it was. Yeah. But yeah, so what'd you call her? You called it was the Catwoman Electra. Yeah.
Which kinda. They even self-reference in there.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, this is I think this is an incredibly fun story arc. I like the idea of that character, even though she is fairly ridiculous and kind of on the absurd side.
The whole thing is fairly ridiculous and absurd.
Which is funny to say in a book where a guy talks to machines and a guy talks to animals. But just the fact that a crazy woman could ride a motorcycle up the stair, like up 110 floors of a skyscraper and make it all the way to the roof and then base jump off of, like that part seems ridiculous, but the people having superpowers doesn't. It is kind of it's a fun moment of levity, I think, about this character and kind of the chaos that she introduces here, again, around the real world event of the 2004 Republican National Convention in New York.
I did wonder,
once again, mixing
once he committed to that, I was like, they're going to have to depict one of these people that it seems like they're going out of the way not to depict. And then they wrote him a way out of it.
A way out of actually appearing at the convention floor. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, so he refers to her as a Catwoman or Electra. I would probably also throw in certain iterations of Black Canary.
I was gonna say Black Cat. Black Cat's more.
Black Cat's even better.
Yeah, because you want someone who is on that hero villain line, anti-hero kind of stuff there. Sometimes a good guy, sometimes a bad guy. Black Canary is an actual good guy. So yeah, Black Cat, Catwoman, Electra, older version of Electra, something like that. But again, I just think it's an incredibly fun, very random, like out of left field introduction into the story. It gives it some levity that the story doesn't always have.
That's true. Yeah, the crazy stalker girl feels like a very 2000s plot line.
Yes.
Yeah, and her whole personality trait is that
doesn't age well.
Crazy. Yeah.
That specifically doesn't age very well. I think we can agree about that.
But all that, it's like there are crazy people out there regardless of gender, and it's like, yeah, it could happen. It was like isn't that like the whole crappy origin in Amazing Spider-Man 2, the movie, where like he doesn't remember Max's name and he's like, I'm gonna be a villain now because Spider-Man didn't remember my name. And it was
Amazing Spider-Man, something like that. Yeah,
really bad. And yeah.
But I think you landed on something there, was the idea that it is a very standard comic book trope, even though it's a very worn out and trite one. So it would make sense that in your book about a superhero in the real world with a character who is obsessed with comic books and knows those stories, it would make sense that his actions would God, I don't want to say he's to blame for that, but that this is a logical step for him to have some sort of obsessed fan in this way. You know, that it's the kind of thing you would expect in a superhero story. It's just that now he's no longer a superhero; he's the mayor. You know, so it's the kind of thing that you would expect if we had a superhero like Mitchell in real life. You would have a character like what is her name? Her name was what, Monica? Is that what it was?
Yeah, I think. I mean, the fact that you don't remember means it doesn't really matter. But
Well, yeah, because she shows up here in the flashback and her story's over by the end of the arc. You know, so again, it's not her. The specifics of her are less important, aside from the fact that he saved her once, and then she saw him on 9/11 and resents resents him retiring, much like Kremlin and all that, but for a completely different reason.
right. But also, I'm looking at those pages now. It opens with her saying, "Hello, my name is Monica, and I'll be your guide." But the Great Machine isn't there yet, and it shows his whole interaction with her. He never got her name.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. He doesn't know who she is, So, but yeah, no. Again, because it's she's not actually important in that way. It just again, I think she's meant to represent an archetype for the kind of person that in a story like this you'd expect someone like Mitchell to have. You know, that obsessed stalker character is a well-worn trope. And again, how well do they execute it here? I think you're right. The specifics that the crazed person who's in love with, has this idea of love for this character, this infatuation, doesn't age all that great. But again, I think the havoc and the
not
chaos.
A damsel in distress. And
it is
I
true.
have to say,
yeah. I guess you're right.
He doesn't give into that trope because I feel like more than half the time he's rescuing people, it's a guy.
That's a good point there. She could have gone the route of putting herself in danger constantly to try to get Mitchell's attention.
Right. Well, I mean, also, that, and I'm just thinking of the series in general, because when you think back to like, I think probably the thing that ages worst in movies that I very much still enjoy with the Sam Raimi Spider-Man is like, if you look at Mary Jane's plot lines, they are all just like stick her up in a high place and have her scream.
The very, very true. That
when you want to like start to create a rivalry for her, you put Gwen Stacy in a high place and have her scream.
Yeah.
You know the way to his heart.
Yeah, those were not great. Yeah. But he also straight up punches her at the end of this issue, at the end of this arc too. Like he knocks her out and breaks his hand on her face, which is like not great. But I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
she did have like an ice pick.
That one I did not clock until like the next page when she's like laying on the ground and he's holding his hand.
Yeah.
And I was like, this was not like a domestic dispute. This was someone who caused like an office lockdown.
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, but I'm wondering, if there are like female readers, how that reads to them.
Yeah. Well, I do wonder if maybe that goes back to the original problem with the character of her being the crazy obsessed stalker lady. Just using that trope is probably not the best depiction. But yeah, I mean, I think having Mitchell, of course, I mean, she is holding like a giant ice pick or whatever, saying she's going to kill herself.
Right. So he's genuinely worried about his own life
and her life as well. So,
and he's already, indirectly, but directly pulled a sniper on a guy.
Yeah.
And killed someone for a similar situation.
Yeah. That's
I'm
true.
like, I think, so I'm curious if there's people who think it is wrong to depict him hitting a woman, because this is not like the Hank Pym thing.
Yeah.
Would you also have been offended if there was a sniper through the window and Hunter pulled the trigger of the sniper and just shot her through the head? Hitting her worse than killing her.
Yeah.
Because of the cultural baggage with it.
Yes.
I am genuinely curious if anyone has a take on that. anyone who's not a dude
Yeah,
has
yeah,
a take on that.
yeah. Yeah, I think your comparison back to the jury duty storyline is absolutely spot on. In terms of what level of response is appropriate for Mitchell in a situation where, as well, just in a situation where either he feels himself or the people's lives are in danger. And yeah, I think that's a yeah. It doesn't feel great. It doesn't feel great to watch him just knock this woman out. But at the same time, there's like, well, are there extenuating circumstances that you can justify? Yeah, probably. But then, like, you question yourself, isn't that part of the problem if you can justify this act of violence?
Well, I mean, the real
yeah,
problem is that it's not a problem at all in the book.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
he
Well,
doesn't
yeah.
think, oh no, I just punched a woman unconscious.
Well,
This is
what
going
does
to be
he
a bad PR look for me.
what does he say there? He makes a call and is like, I think I broke something, but he's looking down at his hand,
Right.
So like he's not even concerned about the woman he just knocked out, this crazy person who just shot a grappling gun through the window and tightrope. Like again, the absurdity of this character is off the charts. But yeah, he's concerned about his hand, and then the next scene we see his hand all wrapped up, like he did break his wrist or whatever it is. And like, yeah, that being the concern, and not like the woman laying on the ground unconscious. So
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. So issue 40.
Well, real quick though,
Oh yeah.
before we get to that, we get a coda here at the end where we've seen that Kremlin, this underlying bubbling like C or D plot, right? It's Kremlin scheming, right? That him working with January to try to get into Mitchell's safe or whatnot, his kind of his special office,
now.
and he has this file, and we see the return of Suzanne, the journalist, the woman he dated for a little while back in the early part of the series, and that he has some sort of information, some sort of compromising information that obviously he's giving to a reporter. There's only one outcome there, is he wants them to publish something here. He has some dirt. He has something on Mitchell that, again, as far as we know, what Kremlin's aims are to end his political career. That's ultimately what he wants him no longer being mayor, no longer being a politician. He wants him back as the Great Machine. So just kind of, again, we're laying this groundwork for something that's going to happen. And again, so if you think back to the very beginning, the very first issue, the opening pages is Mitchell talking about something terrible that happened, right? He's talking to someone about something that happened at the end of his term as mayor. So we're foreshadowing, kind of laying the groundwork for what that might be. And obviously, as we come to the end of the final issues next week, we'll get that reveal here. But I think it's worth noting that we're kind of inching this way. They're kind of slow playing their way through this underlying thread that we know at some point has to come to a head and has to reveal itself and be some sort of larger kind of cataclysmic thing in Mitchell's life outside of the regular just what problems do I got to deal with as mayor today. There's something greater going on here. So I think just worth clocking, worth noting, and that there's that storyline continues. It's going somewhere now. All the scheming, all the planning.
It's just going so
has,
slow that I'm like, just like call me back when you're actually doing something.
Yeah.
Or going to tell me something.
Well, but I think in this case, what they didn't want to do is like come in the last maybe 3 issues and have like, oh, Kremlin's been doing this whole time. We just haven't seen it. So I think they're trying to show their work.
Yeah, they're trying to lay pipe, but I think
you
have to break it into pieces where I'm actually getting like new information. I guess the new information was this time it goes to the journalist, but it still was like, I think it's very strange that the Russian character whose name we don't even get or doesn't matter, we get his whole nefarious plan for Hundred's assassination of the Pope the first time we see him. And we've seen Kremlin deal with this at least 5 times now. We have no idea what this information is.
Yeah, we just know it's allegedly some sort of bombshell, right? Otherwise, why would he go through the lengths to get it?
So it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong here, Kremlin knew about this information, knew what the information was, but didn't have proof. So he needed her to go get the proof, or he knew that there was some information but didn't know what it was, so
Yes,
needed her to
that's
go get the information.
that is unclear as to, yeah, did he send January on a mission to break in and find anything, or to find something, or did he tell her to break in to find this thing? And my thought it's almost the latter. Like, it's like, I know there's something there, you just got to get it. I can't get it because obviously I don't have access. So I read it as, um I need hard proof of something that I know that can bring Mitchell down. That's the way that I read it.
Yeah. Okay. Uh,
All right.
that's how it was too for me, but I was like, it's very possible he knows very specifically what's in the file,
Yeah,
but he can't take it to a journalist without the hard proof.
exactly. Yeah.
Um,
Because it doesn't seem like Kremlin to be like, I'm guessing there's dirt on him in there. I'm going to recruit this person to infiltrate his staff to go in on a hunch. It doesn't seem like Kremlin to be like, oh, we just happened to find this incriminating file on Mitchell. So I feel like, to be consistent with his character and who he is, that he knows what's there. He just needed someone to go get it, so he had actual hard evidence and proof of it. It doesn't seem like he's the kind of person that would act on, well, maybe there might be someone that brings him down. I don't think he operates that way. So yeah, I think he sent Janu on a very specific mission. You got to go break into this safe and get this file. Look for this specifically, and when you get that, then we'll have them. So
got it. Yeah.
yep,
Okay. Okay. So now issue 40,
issue 40. Okay.
the crazy meta, just, just wild stuff.
So I'm curious, what were you thinking when you got to this and you started reading these first couple pages here? Like, did you have any idea what was going on?
No,
Okay.
no, I didn't know that was Brian K. Vaughan. I've never met him. I don't know what he looks like.
Okay. So that was my question here, because Tony Harris doesn't quite look like this now, 20 years on. But 20 years ago, BKV was still a bald white guy. Like, he looks the same, because he's been bald the whole time. So so you didn't know what you were reading here, who these people were. So at what point did it jump onto you? Like, when they started dropping some of the names, or what?
Well, so then I bit on the Bendis thing,
Okay.
and I was like, oh, it's weird. He's depicting another writer. It's Brian Bendis. And then I was like, wait, that I do know what Brian Bendis looks like. I was like, that's not him.
Yeah.
And then they like literally said that it's Brian K. Vaughan. And I was like, oh, now I see what they're doing. And it is a funny joke to confuse him with Brian Bendis.
Well, I mean, Bendis also like a bald white dude. So, like,
Does he have facial hair usually?
no, neither one of them do.
Okay. I was
Both,
thinking Brian Bendis had like a thin goatee.
no, both from Cleveland as well. Part of the many.
That's our very first episode. Is
Yeah,
the zero.
yeah.
We talk about the weird collection of talent from Cleveland.
Yeah. Well,
Giants.
the Bendis, Kayvon, and Azzarello, all from Cleveland. Which obviously was, that's where Superman was created. So Cleveland has a outsized place in comic history already. That's where Siegel and Schuster debuted Superman. But yeah, so there's that's a funny meta joke about him and Bendis and all that there. But okay, so you went all the way through. I mean, that's several pages in.
No, I had to go reread it.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
I like I read the issue and then was like, oh, okay. And then was like, okay, let me just go read that front half again. Just to track with what's going on. And I was like, okay, this is actually pretty clever that I now see I can't remember what I said before and after we're on the air, but I think I already said this, that this is a slightly different version of our world, which means this is not the same Brian K. Vaughan or Tony Harris that are making the comic.
Not necessarily. Yeah.
Yeah, not necessarily. So it is like a slightly altered version of them. But it's close enough to them that this is how they would act in this situation.
Yeah. Well, I think it's funny. I mean, in terms of some of the names they dropped there, like, when BKV in the story is talking to Tony Harris. He's saying, he says Abernathy says Meltzer and Hitch are at the top. So Abernathy, reference to Ben Abernathy, who is the editor, their editor on this book at Wildstorm, actual person. Meltzer is Brad Meltzer, the author, comic book writer as well, both novels and comics. Hitch is Brian Hitch, who also at this point out of the Wildstorm label. Again, it's someone that I think Jim Lee found back when Wildstorm was still over at Image. So again, we're dropping actual names here. People again. So if you are, kind of steeped in the comics at the times, you would know all that. At this point, 2000. Oh man, this is written in 05. I should have looked this up earlier. When did Identity Crisis?
Mm.
That's
that era that I didn't read. I've gone much further back and I've read more recently, but that is like the lull area right before I started reading.
Okay. So when this is being written, Identity Crisis has already come out, which is a very big, now kind of controversial book that Brad Meltzer did for DC. But that book came out in 2004. So here we are. October 04. Okay. So that is while Identity Crisis is coming out. So if this were a real thing where you're trying to pitch someone on doing a comic book for you, Meltzer doing this would have been huge because he would have had, I think, Just Leave America at this time as well, plus Identity Crisis. So he would have been a huge name to jump into comics at this point. So if you're reading at this time in 07, that would have been a name that would have definitely jumped out. So I think that's, again, these kind of meta in jokes here. This the swing that they're taking with this issue. I'm unclear. It's unclear to me even now how well it actually works, if it's actually that effective. But being the comic book nerd that I am, I just enjoy it. I wonder how it would have read at the time.
This seems like the ultimate. Like this is what you use a special.
Yes. This being in the regular run of issues does
Very
feel
strange.
Yeah, it does feel more out of place than like the Halloween issue, the one we talked about last week, the one that Jean Paul Leon did, where we actually got more backstory into Mitchell and when he got his powers and how he uses them and things like that. That had more to do with the overall characterization and the overall storyline than this issue does. So yeah, this very much could have been, and I also think it could have been funny if the first part of the issue where we have Brian K. Vaughan and Tony Harris as characters, if all that were drawn by someone else. Obviously, the joke at the end is that the actual Great Machine comic is Garth Ennis and Jim Lee, which is very, very funny. But it would have been, I think there would have been an extra level of funny there because Tony Harris is drawing this stuff right now. So he's drawing himself and Brian. So it would have been, maybe that's a hat on a hat. They had
done the whole issue, yeah.
If no, not Lee and Ennis, but if someone else had drawn Tony Harris drawing Brian K. Vaughan,
that's what I'm saying. Well, like if Jim Lee had done,
well, that's it. I don't think it would have been,
but yeah.
It couldn't have been Jim Lee because you want that joke at the end. So you get someone else, like maybe you get Brian Hitch to draw the first part of this, and where they're talking about that Brian, so that's how they would have done it if it were a special. And I think that would have been very, very funny. Again, that might have been like a hat on a hat kind of thing, or maybe we're just going a little bit too far with the meta jokes. But kind of regardless, I find this issue wildly enjoyable, if not like completely superfluous,
Yeah. To me, it's the ultimate. Had I read this when I met Tony Harris, this would have been the one issue I had him sign.
Yeah.
It's certainly, I was like, I don't need this whole issue run around now that I've got the omnibus, but if I ever have a chance to meet Brian K. Vaughan, I'm bringing him issue 40 of Ex Machina. Yeah, make him sign his own shiny head.
I do think also, I think what's interesting here is that, we get we get this big kind of monologue from Brian K. Vaughan in the story about where he was on 9/11 and kind of his reaction after the fact, um, which I believe is all entirely true. Like that's just like him kind of like emptying the notebook on his feelings and his thoughts of kind of where his mindset was at the time and all that. And I believe some of these notes here I think are autobiographical. The idea of his girlfriend at the time living in California. I do think he goes out there, so I think those elements are actually in play in his actual life, or at least they would have been in 2003. I think those elements are actually true there, which are interesting enough for for Brian K. Vaughan, less so not interesting at all really for Mitchell himself, but just the idea that they're putting so much autobiographical stuff into this version of themselves. I guess on one hand, it can seem like a complete vanity project, you know?
Right.
And
Yeah, I didn't read it as vanity at all. I like it's because I don't think he's painting himself either of them in a very positive light.
no, yeah, that is true. But it is, I think that big monologue piece there is almost him like saying,
Yeah.
like he felt he had to unload that. He had to put that on paper to maybe help him deal with it or whatever it is. Like there's some level of self-therapy there of him putting those words into his own mouth as a character in his book, like him needing to get that off his chest and say that, which I think it's an interesting storytelling choice there. And then of course we get the end there, when first off we get the Bradbury with the gun again because that's what he does.
Yeah.
Obviously it's just he's just doing a reference pose for Tony Harris and things like that, which is all very, very, again, that's meta jokes within the comic you're already reading,
Right.
in terms of the characterization of Bradbury. Like you're not surprised when he has his gun pulled.
I
and
mean,
all
this,
that.
but that to me seems like it almost seems like the type of joke that assumes you have super fans, right?
Well,
It's like
yeah.
if you're
Well,
reading this as like
yeah.
one of your weekly, if there was no one who was reading only this comic, right?
Well,
So this
no,
is like
yeah.
in people's pull list. You're reading it one issue at a time for years and years and years.
Well, and
You
I
know,
think that
he
goes back
does
to,
kick down doors with his gun out.
yeah.
But
Well,
for that to joke to really land, you have to be binging it like we are.
Well, no. I don't think you have to be binging it. I think you have to be just paying attention and reading this book and also reading other books there. There's even the joke when he's like, oh, yes, you do the book about the guy being chased around by lesbians on motorcycles, which is an allusion to Why the Last Man, because those the call of the Daughters of the Amazon there. And Mitchell cuts him off. Is like, I'm not really a Vertigo guy, which is,
Right.
again, this other level of meta joke there. But he does then reference Starman, which is the book we talked about that Tony Harris had done. He won an Eisner for that book. So this issue assumes that not only are you reading, and our devoted reader of Ex Machina, but the assumption is you've read other books by these guys. Some of the recent history of Vertigo and Wildstorm and things of that nature. What these books are, and that you're conversant with the creator's other books, for these jokes to land here for Mitchell to be like, yeah, I don't really read those books. You can see that Mitchell's more of a straight line superhero guy, obviously all DC probably, but he's reading Justice League characters. That's it. He's not doing the whole indie comic thing probably. That's not really his bag. But this issue assumes that its readers are, and that they're paying attention and know what's going on in that imprint of DC. It almost expects that the readers know this stuff, that maybe Mitchell doesn't. Like Mitchell hasn't read Why the Last Man, but it's assuming that you, the reader, have read Why the Last Man.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, I will give them a pass this far in.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like you've already introduced the concept of specials. Just make it a special.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's my only note on that one, other than like it was super fun.
Yeah.
Not at all necessary.
Yeah, it really wasn't. I think, again, we should talk about those last 2 pages. Again, actually written by Garth Ennis, actually drawn by Jim Lee. And worth noting too, you know, change in lettering, change in dialogue bosses, even though it is the same letterer as as the actual book, Jared Fletcher. But again, it's style different.
And most importantly, they make him seem cool and like a competent hero,
Yes,
which
yes, yeah,
we
yeah.
have
Well,
not actually had any reason to believe that that was the
absolutely.
case.
I mean, the whole thing. I mean, the idea of him putting the gloves on and him getting ready like he's going into battle, and yeah, he looks way cooler.
Looks like
And yeah,
Superman. Yeah.
yeah. He's going into battle. Um, and I think part of that is why you get Jim Lee to draw these pages, because he puts that, he has that superhero dynamism just in his art. But yeah, the whole idea that we've seen, quote unquote, what the real story is behind the Great Machine, and so to see the comic book version of that, to be this like overly heroic version of it, overly competent, overly self-assured. Again, that's again more of this meta joke that we, the reader, know that that's not what it was like. He wasn't
Right.
that cool. It didn't look like that. But you get this really really fun, inspiring kind of 2 pages from Ennis and Lee, which is again just another kind of joke added on, which is very fun, very fun. But again, I'm with you too. It it's a wildly enjoyable issue, but it doesn't fit here. Like again, if that were a special, and then the issue about slavery came at the end of this issue, it would have felt weird to end a collection or end a trade on
Right.
that issue of race there, but it would have felt consistent with how they've been telling the story. Again, 3 or 4 issue arc, 1-shot issue, another 3 or 4 issue arc, 1-shot issue. It would have felt right with the structure. And then if this were another special, because everything about it screams, quote unquote, outside continuity. It's not important that he's meeting with these comic book creators at this time in his term in office. None of that feels important to the story. So had that been a special, and then you kept the same kind of story arc, single issue story arc, single issue release structure, it would have felt more consistent. It would have felt more of a piece with what had come before. But yeah, having said all that, I enjoyed every page, every panel of that issue of issue 40, because that's just kind of the comic book nerd's dream, to see that referential, that the people making it have that level of awareness and kind of self-deprecation, I guess.
Yeah, it is nice to see. I mean, like, and what other book could they really do this in? Like Brian K. Vaughan can't put himself in Saga, Paper Girls. It's like you have to have a character who's into comics,
and you have to establish that the comics he's reading are the comics that we're reading,
right?
Which they've already done, obviously. So yeah, you have to put that legwork in and have your guy be a fan of comics, and then put in a position where he could plausibly have a comic done about him. There's a lot of levels like that. There's a lot of meta levels you got to set up first to even make a case for, hey, let's do an issue like this.
Yeah, it's to me seems like it would have been more work than it was worth, but clearly not. They thought it was worthwhile. So
yeah. And I'm sure that was a lot of fun to do, to write, to draw, all of that. I'm sure they got a kick out of that.
This would be like, it's, to me, this is like the super fan book to take to the shows. And anyone involved with this book, have them sign it. Just be like, I see what you did there.
It would awesome. It would be great if you got Brian K. Vaughan and Tony Harris, and you got Garth Ennis, and you got Jim. Like, if you got all of them to sign the issue,
Garth
that
Ennis
stuff
would be like, you want to pay me $10 to sign this?
Yeah. But that would absolutely be a great idea, to have all 4 of those creators sign that issue. Or maybe do the thing where you have Ennis and Lee sign that quote unquote title page at the back there. You sign inside the comic on their pages that they did. Something like that. I'm sure someone has done that out in the past there. I just have my Ex Machina #1 signed by Tony Harris. Not Brian K. Vaughan though, because when I met Brian K. Vaughan, I could only take 3 issues, and I decided to not take Ex Machina. So
it's like Saga, Paper Girls.
No, it was my Saga #1, which is the second print. It was Runaways #1,
okay.
The Marvel book, and it was actually Why the Last Man 50, because I had gotten that signed the day prior by artist Pia Guerra, she had also drawn a little ampersand on it.
Nice.
So I was like, I'm gonna get that signed because it matched with what Pia Guerra had done, which meant on the sidelines were Pit Rico #1, Ex Machina #1, which I'd already had Tony Harris sign. What else did I didn't know it was a 3-item limit until the day of the signing. So I had other issues with me. I probably had We Stand on Guard #1 too with me. I had a lot of stuff with me and had to make a call morning of the show to figure out which 3 it were. But unfortunately, Ex Machina didn't make the cut. So if I ever get a chance to meet him again, I'm sure it'll be a similar kind of limit. Ex Machina would definitely on the list. I gotta pair that Tony Harris signature with a BKV.
Yeah, when you got him do it on 40 as well now, make him.
Well, yeah, that's
making
that's
Tony
all
Harris
the
sign
project,
his self-portrait is just hilarious.
I mean, Tony Harris, because I've seen him on a number of shows. That's not an issue I've ever brought before. But that now that you've mentioned it, if you could complete that superfecta of creators.
I mean, that's a wild moonshot. I guess if you go to the big cons, you could probably do it in a couple of years. But
you could get it. You could get it. Although I don't know if I've ever seen Ennis at a show here, even in like a New York or something like that. But it's possible. It's possible. But that would be a lot of fun. That'd be a fun project to get. Again, I'm sure someone out there has done that. Because there are crazy people that read comics and collect comics and collect signatures like I do. So
yeah. All right. Well, thanks for listening, and join us next week for the conclusion, which would be 41 through 50 and the last special number 4.
Yes, sir.
So that's trades 9 and 10, deluxe 5.
Mm-hmm.
If you have Machina that you haven't read yet, read it. That's
exactly.
The bottom line for next week.
Just read what's left. Read to the end. Read everything that's there. But yeah, we're wrapping up and coming to an end here.
And I'm super excited. And there was only one tease of the whole side time traveling thing. It was like 2 or 3 pages.
Yeah,
this whole arc. And I'm like, surely that is where we're headed now.
Well, and that came kind of during that fever dream aspect in the Vatican part, right? Where he's seeing visions of journal and the firefighter that burned, and then he sees that quote unquote image of God and all that. So we don't know how real is that. How is it being communicated with? But yeah, there was only that one little tease of Zimmer there. So we got that out there. We got the whatever information that Kremlin gave to Suzanne, the journalist. So we got some threads out there, and we know they all got to come to a head somehow at the end.
Yep. All right. We will see you next week. Thanks for listening.
Peace.